When he stepped up to that microphone and his voice cracked, you could feel the entire room shift. This wasn't about tactics. It wasn't about rankings. It wasn't about whether Alexandra Eala was ready for a WTA 1000. It was about what she was hiding. For days, the narrative was simple. Doha was too big. The pressure got to her. The fairy tale stalled at the Qatar Total Energies Open. Analysts talked about nerves. Comment sections talked about expectations. The world assumed they understood. They didn't. According to her coach, Alex wasn't just battling an opponent on court. She was battling her own body. Medical staff had warned her. Not gently, not casually. They told her she was pushing into dangerous territory. Fatigue levels that risked real damage, stress that could spiral into long-term consequences. The responsible choice? Withdraw. Protect the season. Protect her career. She refused, not because she was reckless, because she felt responsible. Doha wasn't just another stop. It was supposed to be the next step in her transformation, from rising talent to established WTA 1000 contender. She had just climbed to a career-high ranking. Filipino fans were flying across continents. Momentum from Australia still buzzed in the air. For 12 months earlier, she was grinding ITF events. Now she was walking into premier stadiums as a top 40 player with major wins on her resume. The spotlight wasn't intimidating her, it was validating her. And that's what makes this so heavy. Her coach revealed she made the team promise not to say anything. If she lost, it would be about tennis. Not pain, not strain, not sacrifice. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want excuses. So she walked off that court in Doha with her head down and let millions assume she simply wasn't good enough that night. Behind the scenes, she had been warned she was flirting with serious injury. That reframes everything. It changes the conversation from, can she handle the level, to how much is she willing to endure to reach it? There's something both inspiring and terrifying about that level of commitment. At 20 years old, she chose to carry the pressure, the expectation, and the physical risk rather than disappoint fans who believed in her. That's not weakness. That's loyalty, maybe to a fault. But here's the bigger question now. What does this mean moving forward? Champions aren't defined by how much pain they can absorb. They're defined by how smartly they manage it. The next evolution for Alex might not be about hitting harder or serving bigger. It might be about learning when to protect the long game. Because if this revelation proves anything, it's this. The heart was never the issue. The fight was never the issue. The belief was never the issue. The world thought Doha exposed her limits. Instead, it may have exposed just how far she's willing to go, and why the people closest to her are both proud and worried. What's your take on this? Does it change how you see that loss? They didn't just anticipate her arrival in Doha, they built around it. Tournament organizers understood exactly what Alexandra Eala represents right now, not just ranking points, but energy, identity, movement. They promoted her matches aggressively at the Qatar Total Energies Open, knowing full well she wasn't just another name in the draw. She was a magnet, and the Filipino community answered that call in a way that shook the stadium. 400s flew in, from Manila, from Dubai, from across the Gulf. Overseas Filipino workers in Qatar rearranged shifts, cashed in leave days, bought tickets the moment sales opened. Families saved for months just to sit in those stands. Red, white, and blue flags covered sections of the arena. Drums echoed, chants in Tagalog rolled through the night air. She wasn't just stepping onto a tennis court, she was walking out carrying a nation. And yet, behind the scenes, something was wrong. 48 hours before her first-round match against Teresa Valentova, her body started sending signals that no elite athlete ever wants to feel. The schedule had been relentless as New Zealand to Australia, back home to the Philippines, then across time zones into the Middle East. Recovery windows shrank. Adrenaline masked fatigue, until it couldn't anymore. In practice, her team noticed it first. A fraction slower to the forehand corner. A pause between points that lasted half a second too long. A flicker of pain when she thought no one was looking. Medical evaluation didn't sugarcoat it. Inflammation across multiple joints. Accumulated muscle fatigue teetering on dangerous. The kind of systemic strain that builds when the calendar doesn't care how young you are. The recommendation was unanimous. Withdraw. Her team agreed. Her family called from Manila, urging caution. Protect the body. Protect the future. Protect the career that could stretch a decade if managed right. She listened, and then she said no, because the people were already there. Flights booked, hotels paid, parents who had sacrificed, kids holding handmade signs with her name written in glitter, girls waiting by practice courts hoping to see the hero who proved someone from Quezon City could stand among the elite. To her, pulling out didn't just mean forfeiting a match. It meant disappointing faces she could already picture in the stands. That's the weight she chose to carry, not because she didn't understand the risk, but because she understood the responsibility. That decision is both breathtaking and heartbreaking. It shows the kind of loyalty and emotional connection she has with her supporters, a bond that goes far beyond rankings and prize money. But it also reveals the fine line elite athletes walk between courage and self-destruction. And now the real question isn't whether she could have won that match. It's this: at 20 years old, how do you balance being a national symbol with being a human being? Because champions don't just need fire, they need preservation. Do you think she made the right call by playing? Or should protecting her body have come first, no matter who was in the stands? If something had to give, it would give under the lights. Not in a press release, not in a quiet withdrawal that sent those red, white and blue flags home folded and silent. For 2 straight days, Alexandra Eala practically lived inside the medical room at the Qatar Total Energies Open. Ice baths, compression sleeves, anti-inflammatory protocols pushed to the absolute edge, physio tables that never seemed to cool down. Everything modern sports science could throw at accumulated fatigue was thrown at her body with urgency that bordered on desperation. But treatment can only mute pain. It cannot erase it. Match day arrived anyway. She taped joints that needed rest more than reinforcement, pulled on her match kit, walked down the tunnel toward a stadium roaring her name, a stadium that had no idea what she was carrying beneath the surface. On the other side of the net stood Teresa Valentova, young, sharp, prepared, and fully aware of their history. This wasn't their first meeting. Valentova had beaten her before at the Japan Open, 6-2, 6-1, a scoreline that told a story of tactical control. She understood Eala's patterns. She knew the rhythm. And now she was facing an opponent whose physical base, the engine of her entire game, was compromised. From the first few exchanges, you could see it. That explosive first step gone. The violent hip rotation on the forehand that once rattled IGA Swiatek in Miami, muted. The elastic defensive sprints that normally turn defense into offense, reduced to calculated survival. She was moving, but she wasn't flying. And at this level, that fraction of a second is everything. Valentova sensed it instantly. The patterns shifted. Deep, heavy balls drove Eala behind the baseline. Sharp angles forced lateral bursts her body struggled to deliver. Every rally became a physical interrogation. The first set turned into a test of will. Against logic. Against biology. And somehow, through grit alone, Eala dragged it into a tiebreak. That's the part people will forget when they glance at the final score. She saved set points. She fought through visible discomfort. She forced extra balls into rallies her legs had no business surviving. But biology does not negotiate. The tiebreak slipped, 7-6 to Valentova, and then the second set told the truth, 6-1. As the games ticked by, the physical toll became undeniable. Between changeovers, her expression wasn't anger at missed shots. It wasn't tactical confusion. It was pain. The kind of pain elite athletes are trained to mask, but not immune to. Her team in the box knew. They had known for 48 hours. They also knew there was no scenario where she would raise her hand and walk away voluntarily while those stands were still chanting. 6-7, 1-6. Match over. But here's what makes this moment so complicated. On paper, it reads like a loss to a well-prepared opponent. In reality, it was a 20-year-old choosing loyalty over longevity for one afternoon. That decision is powerful. It's also dangerous, because the same mentality that builds champions, the refusal to abandon your people, can quietly shorten careers if not balanced with preservation. And now the bigger question isn't about that Doha scoreline. It's about what happens next. Does she learn to protect her body with the same ferocity she protects her pride? Does her team step in harder next time? Or does that fire remain untouchable? Because make no mistake, this wasn't weakness. It was conviction. But even conviction has a cost. In the stands, hundreds of Filipino flags stopped waving at once. The drums fell silent. The chants dissolved into something heavier, confusion, disbelief, heartbreak. This wasn't the ending they had imagined. And somehow, it was only the beginning. 20 minutes later, Alexandra Eala sat behind a microphone under bright press room lights that felt harsher than any stadium spotlight. Exhaustion was written across her face. Her media team tried to steady the moment, but no amount of preparation could hide the redness around her eyes or the slight tremble in her hands as she adjusted the mic. She inhaled, then she unraveled. With the losses along with the wins. I think that would really touch me. The sentences came out in pieces. Not polished quotes. Not media-trained answers. Just fragments. She apologized. To the fans. To the families who had flown in to see her. To the people who had believed. She said she gave everything. She said it wasn't enough. What she didn't say was louder. She didn't mention the exhaustion that had been building for weeks. She didn't mention the medical warnings. She didn't mention the 48 hours of treatment that barely kept her functional. She didn't mention the conversations about withdrawing. Every ounce of responsibility flowed inward, absorbed by a 20-year-old who had just pushed her body past its limits. And outside that room, the reaction was immediate. Social media ignited. Timelines turned ruthless. Hot takes multiplied. Mentally soft. She can't handle WTA 1000 pressure. The hype was bigger than the results. The same voices that had been chanting hours earlier now typed with surgical cruelty. She read it. She answered none of it, because this was the narrative she had chosen to protect. But at the back of that press room, someone else was watching. Her coach stood still, arms folded tight, witnessing his player dismantle herself in public. Promises had been made between them, promises that he would let her control her story, even if that story turned her into the villain. He would stay silent, even while the knives came out. But watching her apologize for a match she physically should never have played, something inside him snapped. As handlers guided her toward the exit, face still wet with tears, shoulders heavy, he stepped forward. The journalists were already packing up. He wasn't. His hand wrapped around the microphone, knuckles white. "Nobody leaves," he said. The room froze. Laptops reopened. Cameras swung back into position. Every whisper died instantly. "I just watched that girl apologize for losing a tennis match." His voice cracked. "What she didn't tell you, what she made all of us swear we would never reveal, is that she shouldn't have been on that court today." Silence deepened. Medical staff advised withdrawal 48 hours ago. No one moved. And in that suspended moment, the story shifted, not from defeat to excuse, but from blame to truth. Because sometimes the strongest athlete in the room isn't the one who wins the match. It's the one who absorbs the storm, and still refuses to betray her own standards. And sometimes, the bravest act isn't playing through pain, it's finally letting the world see it. Pens froze above paper. Recorders captured every syllable. What followed didn't just challenge the narrative, it tore it apart. Her coach laid it out step by step. The travel. New Zealand to Australia. Australia to the Philippines. Then straight to the Middle East. Time zones stacking up, recovery windows shrinking. Tournament after tournament with no real pause. The kind of schedule that quietly wears down even the strongest bodies. Then came the medical report, 2 days before the match. Inflammation, severe muscle fatigue, a clear, unanimous instruction, withdraw immediately. He described the 48 hours that followed. Endless treatment sessions, ice baths, compression therapy, anti-inflammatories pushed to their limit. The entire team urging her to think long-term. Protect your career. One tournament is not worth permanent damage. And then his composure shattered. "You want to know what she said when we told her she had to pull out?" Tears streamed freely now. She said her people were already there. Families who flew in from Manila. Overseas workers who sacrificed leave days. Little girls holding handmade posters with her name. She said she refused to send them home with nothing. His hand struck the table. She said if her body had to break, it would break on that court, not in a withdrawal statement. The room went silent. Reporters who had been preparing headlines about Alexandra Eala struggling again simply stared. That young woman who apologized to all of you? That wasn't weakness. That was a 20-year-old willing to sacrifice herself rather than disappoint the people who believed in her. He pointed toward the door she had exited minutes earlier. She played a WTA 1000 match on a body doctors said shouldn't even be practicing. She chased every ball, took every swing, fought for every point while her muscles were failing underneath her. His voice dropped to a whisper. And then she sat here and blamed herself. He wiped his eyes. "In 30 years of coaching professionals, I have never witnessed something more selfless." He urged them to rewatch the match. Now with the truth. What looked like hesitation was physical limitation. What looked like unforced errors were muscles refusing to respond. What looked like a bad day was something close to a medical miracle. Every ball she reached defied what her body should have allowed. Every point she won was a battle against her own physiology. The scoreline, 7-6, 1-6, against Teresa Valentova, who had beaten her before and came in fresh and prepared, suddenly told a different story. "That's not a loss," he said quietly. "That's superhuman." Valentova herself had sensed something was off. noting afterward that Alexandra didn't move the way she normally does. Now she understood. Now everyone did. Within hours, the tide turned. The same platforms that had criticized her filled with apologies. Hashtags transformed into tributes. Headlines were rewritten. Commentators who had questioned her mental toughness scrambled to praise her courage. But the most important shift didn't happen online. It happened in the hearts of her people. The families in the stands. The workers who had taken time off. The little girls clutching handmade signs. They realized they hadn't witnessed failure. They had witnessed love. Not a player cracking under pressure, but a daughter carrying the weight of a nation on an injured body because she couldn't bear the thought of letting them down. This is who Alexandra Eala truly is. Not the scoreline in Doha. Not the tears in the press room. Not the early criticism. A competitor who chose her supporters over her own comfort. A warrior who would rather fracture herself than fracture their belief. A champion whose heart proved stronger than the body that faltered. At just 20 years old, she has already done what no Filipino tennis player before her achieved, defeating elite opponents, winning Grand Slam matches, claiming gold for her country, and building a fan base so passionate it turns neutral courts into home arenas. The body will recover. The rankings will rise again. The titles many predict for her future will come, but Doha will remain, not as a defeat, but as the moment the world saw what truly drives her. Beyond talent, beyond technique, beyond rankings, a heart so fiercely loyal that she would rather endure pain than disappoint those who believe in her. That is the real story behind Doha.